Tonight, an exclusive interview with the President of the United States, Donald Trump. We'll talk about how he'll protect those statues falling all over the country, his position on the life issues, and much more. And later, former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich will react to the Trump interview, and he'll talk about his new book. A whistleblower is accusing the Communist Chinese government of paying for the Vatican's silence on human rights. Asia expert and president of the Population Research Institute, Stephen MOSHER, joins us with analysis. Finally, star kicker for the New Orleans Saints, Thomas Morstead, discusses his career, his faith, and his new book, The Middle School Rules of Thomas Morstead. The World Over begins right now.
Now, Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. We're delighted to have you with us. President Donald Trump coming up in an exclusive. Newt Gingrich, Stephen MOSHER, and Thomas Morstead are all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, send me a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. Lots to cover. First, some news. According to the U.S. Justice Department, New York City can no longer impose COVID-19 restrictions more heavily on religious gatherings than mass public protests. In a June 22nd letter, Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, Eric Dryband, writes, quote, Mayor de Blasio's recent public statements and enforcement of COVID-19 orders have demonstrated a troubling preference for certain First Amendment rights over others. The Assistant AG went on to say that restrictions on places of worship must be consistent with the First Amendment when such restrictions also apply to comparable secular gatherings. And Planned Parenthood has launched a new campaign this week urging American businesses to offer free birth control coverage to employees in order to battle systemic racism. In a Tuesday press release unveiled in its Business for Birth Control 2020 campaign, it calls upon companies to acknowledge that contraception is essential to women's health care. Planned Parenthood claims that systemic racism has made access to birth control more difficult for African American women. More on these stories and others later with Newt Gingrich. Earlier this week, we brought you an exclusive interview with President Donald Trump. We cut into our normal programming schedule so we could bring it to you earlier. He spoke candidly with me about how he wants to get the country to reopen in the wake of this global pandemic and the protests we're seeing across the country. We also discussed race in America and the war being waged against statues and memorials. Here's the first part of my exclusive interview with President Donald Trump. Mr. President, this week we saw Columbus go down. Roosevelt is now going down. St. Junipero Serra, who built all the missions along California. What can you and the federal government do about this?
By the way, Gandhi, okay, you saw Ulysses S. Grant where they want to take him down. He's the one that stopped the ones that everybody dislikes so much. You know, it's a disgrace. Also, remember, some of this is great artwork. This is magnificent artwork, as good as there is anywhere in the world, as good as you see in France, as good as you see anywhere. It's a disgrace. Most of these people don't even know what they're taking down.
Is there anything you can do?
Yeah,
can you add
we're
it
going
to
to
the
do something
National
very soon.
Historic?
We're going to do an executive order, and we're going to make the cities guard their monuments. This is a disgrace. Now, for the most part, they're not federal. Oh, it was up to them. They're already talking about Thomas Jefferson. The great Jefferson
Washington.
Memorial. They're talking about
Lincoln.
They're talking about Washington. Lincoln, I haven't heard, but they're probably talking about that too.
I need to talk for a moment about Daca. That big Daca ruling came down.
Right.
The bishops of the United States hailed that ruling. There are 700,000 dreamers out there. What do you mean to do with them?
So what we want to do is win the case and then work it out, because we'll be able to work it out. They're not going to have anything to worry about. But you know, we didn't lose that case. That case was, the statement was made, refile it or do whatever you want in a different form. John Roberts didn't like the form, so we're going to give it to him in a different form. It was a similar rule to the census, which frankly I wanted to do it a different way. I should have done it the way I originally wanted. I wanted to go back in, but they just went with it. But this is a very important thing, and It actually gives the president more power. I should be happy, but I don't want that power.
We are seeing unprecedented violence across the country, Mr. President, in this CHOP, this territory in Seattle. You've been watching this on the news. Is there anything you from this office can do to restore order and safety?
Right. Raymond, what I want people to watch just for a little while. It's all Democrats, usually liberal Democrats. Take a look. Whether it's Chicago, it's Democrat. Seattle, it's Democrat. The state of Washington, it's Democrat. Portland, it's Democrat. All of these places are run by Democrats. 20 out of 20 are Democrat run. They don't know what they're doing. And if Biden got in, this country would be a disaster because you don't report on 98% of the places. Take a look at the way we're running things. We're running them good. And if I weren't president, they would have overrun. You talk about the statues. We wouldn't have any statues standing right now because I did things that you don't know about to save a lot of them. Now, they ripped one down the other night right in front of the police headquarters. We have a liberal Democrat mayor, and she should not have allowed that to happen.
I need to get to something I've been hearing a lot of in evangelical and Catholic circles. They're saying, Joe Biden says he's opposed to the death penalty, and in these Catholic and evangelical circles, they say he supports efforts to end climate change, therefore he's pro-life, and you're not. What would your response be?
So first of all, Joe Biden, I am totally in favor of the death penalty for heinous crimes, okay? That's the way it is, all right? I'm pro-life, he's not, and the Democrats, look who he's putting on the court. They want to put people on the court. You have no chance. So I'm pro-life, the Democrats aren't. Nobody can say that Biden isn't. Look at his stance over the years. But you know, and I know, Biden's not going to be running things. It's going to be run by other people. Biden's shot. It's one of those things, I hate to say it, but Biden is shot. But the Democrats are not, it's not just him, it's a party, it's a platform. Take a look at the platform. Look at the governor of Virginia. Look at what he did. He did an execution after, normally they talk about late term. His wasn't late term. His was the baby was born, and then you can execute the baby. That's the Democrats, and that's Biden.
Talk to me for a moment. John Bolton's making a lot of headlines this morning about claiming that you spoke with President Xi and were willing to, pleaded with him to help in your reelection, and that you approved these concentration camps in China.
Yeah, first of all,
speak to that.
I don't plead with anybody, and he knows that. He's a lying guy. He was a washed-up guy. I gave him a chance. He couldn't get confirmed by the Senate. I gave him a non-confirmed, an area where you don't have to go through the Senate. And then he goes out and writes a book. The book is a total lie, but more importantly, or mostly a lie, more importantly, what he did is illegal. It's classified information. And I think, number one, we're going to get back for the government the money, any money that he made. And number two, I think he's got very major problems. He violated the law. Let's see what happens.
Well, and Mulvaney came out and said, this is fiction today.
Mick Mulvaney was great, and Mnuchin was great. And if you look at our great Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, he was great. Everybody was in the room, and nobody heard what Bolton heard. And why would I do that? China has never met a person in this office that's treated them the way I do. Never. We've taken in tens of billions of dollars from China. They've never had a situation like this. Before the pandemic, which probably was sent by them, whether it was accident or on purpose, we'll figure that out. But before this horror show that all these 188 countries are going through, China was having the worst year in 67 years.
Right.
That's me. That's because of me. Because with any of these people, if you take a look what happened with Biden and Obama, China ripped this country like it's never been ripped before, and that'll go back. If Biden won, China would own the United States. They would literally own the United States. You know it, and so do I.
Let's talk for a moment about these mail-in ballots. There are calls across the country. I read where Michigan has already sent in mail-in ballot requests to all their voters. What can you do about this? You believe this will promote or encourage fraud in the election?
I think it's going to be the greatest fraud ever. I think it's going to be a rigged election if they do that, if they're allowed to do it. We went through World War I and World War II. People went out and voted. And now they're saying the pandemic, they're using that as an excuse. The news is building it up like crazy. Mail-in ballots, you're going to have foreign countries. You talk about foreign countries, they're going to be printing their own ballots. It will be a rigged election if they do that. Now, we're suing on many different states,
right.
and we're having great luck. We're winning some of these suits. We're going to see what happens. If we go to mail-in ballots, they're going to take them out of the mailboxes. They're going to take them from postmen. They're going to print them fraudulently, and foreign countries are going to print them. California just announced they're sending out millions and millions of ballots. Where are they going, Raymond? Where are these ballots going? Who are they going to? And then maybe they don't send to a Republican neighborhood. You take a look. We had 7 races in California at the end, House races. Everybody was close, and then in the end we lost. They dumped a whole pile of ballots on tables. But we won the big one. We won the one just recently.
Right.
And first time in 22 years. I think really good things are happening. People are seeing what's happening, but mail-in ballots will lead to the greatest rigged election and the greatest fraud in the history of our country, potentially.
We have to talk about police reform. This is at the top of every headline. It's bound up in the protests we've been seeing. Do you support, and it's spreading around Capitol Hill, the idea of ending qualified immunity for cops?
Look, we're going to have to let our police, number one, we need great people, and we have great people. You'll see one person, but you won't see thousands of people that do a great job. Police, law enforcement. We have the greatest law enforcement in the world. We have to protect them. If you do anything with immunity, nobody's going to be able to do their job. So no, I don't support it at all.
Here to give us his take on my interview with the president and much more is former Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives and the author of the new book, Trump and the American Future, Solving the Great Problems of Our Time. Would you welcome Newt Gingrich back to the program? Mr. Speaker, thank you for being here. I want to get your reaction to the news the president broke with us regarding the protection of statues and monuments via an executive order. He later announced that he means to use the Veterans Memorial Preservation Act. Listen.
We're looking at long-term sentences under the Act. We have a very specific Monuments Act, and we are looking at long-term jail sentences for these vandals and these hoodlums and these anarchists and agitators, and call them whatever you want. I want to also say this. If the state governments, because you see them all over in Seattle, they're very weak. And in Minnesota, they might need help. If they need help, the federal government is willing to help them. If these hoodlums come around.
Newt, the Veterans Memorial Preservation Act only applies to military monuments on public property. That wouldn't necessarily protect St. Junipero Serra or Thomas Jefferson, would it?
Well, I think it depends on how you want to interpret military. They may end up in court fighting over it, but it's certainly in the case of Jefferson, who had been an officer in the Revolutionary War. I think you could cover him without much of a stretch. All of the early presidents had been in the military, so and certainly General Grant would have been covered by that. He's been one of the targets. But what I think is amazing, Raymond, is the contrast between Governor Cuomo saying yesterday that, oh, if people want to break up statues, that's fine, because probably helps them get their feelings out. And President Trump saying correctly, this is about property, and it's about people having made decisions. And no, barbarians and vandals don't have a right to go around destroying things.
Newt, as a historian, this has got to strike you particularly because I remember during your entire tenure as Speaker, you would go out of your way to find the historical precedent and to put things in context, things you were doing in Congress, certain policies or events that were underway. Give me your sense of what this means from a sociological point of view, from a historical point of view, when you have Americans willy-nilly, without votes, without any consideration, just throwing ropes over these statues and yanking them down. What's happening? What does that tell you about where Americans are, or pieces of America are, at this moment?
Well, I think there are three different things coming together. One is, as I wrote in a recent newsletter, you have 3 generations of brainwashing into left-wing ideas. So they actually feel empowered to hate America, because that's what their professors have taught them. The second is you have people who, like Antifa, who really are organized, hardened anti-Americans, and they deliberately want to go out and do this. And the third is you have just sort of a criminal element. I mean, there are people who, summertime, it's a cheap date. Let's go destroy a statue. Or let's go raid a Nike store. I mean, you guys remember the pictures of people coming down Fifth Avenue, breaking into those stores. They were on a commercial venture. They were out grabbing all sorts of goodies. So I think all three of those come together. And then, as the president pointed out, you have such weak left-wing leaders in most of these cities that it is astonishing how bad they are.
As you heard, President Trump, Newt, earlier also weighed in on the Supreme Court's Daca ruling. He said the Dreamers would be taken care of. What would you advise the president to do with the Daca Dreamers? And what does his resubmitting an end to Daca accomplish?
Well, I think that the people who actually did come here at a very, very early age, many of whom no longer speak any language but English, a number of whom have been here long enough to graduate from high school as valedictorians, which real human beings. A priest in Atlanta who came as a DACA. I think the president will be well put to find a way to say to Congress, here's a very narrowly drawn bill that takes care of everybody who's legitimately came here as a young child. I will sign it if you'll pass it. Now, don't play games with it, yes or no. Would you like to offer them a permanent future? And don't play political games with it, and put the burden right directly back on the
And limit it to the people who are already here.
Limit it to people who came here at a very early age and who legitimately have spent virtually all their life here. I would also say you can instruct ICE to make violent criminals, drug dealers, gang members your primary targets, and you'll never get to a DACA person unless they're very rare DACA people who get in that kind of trouble. So you would basically not be targeting DACA dreamers because you would be going after other people. And just say that, and just say up front, this is not what we're going. We're not in the business of tracking down somebody who came here at 3 years of age and is now 22.
Yeah. I want your reaction, Newt, to the question I asked the president regarding the pro-life cause. That despite President Trump's position on life issues, as a non-Catholic, many Catholics and evangelicals consider Joe Biden to be truly pro-life. Now, is President Trump the most pro-life president in history as he maintains, or do the Biden supporters have a point here?
Well, I don't think the Biden supporters have any point. Biden is a Catholic. In fact, Clifton and I have been at Mass with him. But the fact is that Biden's position will be the position of the left wing of the Democratic Party, which is abortion paid for by the taxpayers. He said he would sign Nancy Pelosi's $3 trillion bill, which provides for tax-paid abortions in the 9th month as a fundamental break with everything we've ever said about it. So functionally, Biden will be a very pro-abortion president, no matter what he tells you about his personal feelings.
Now, I took a lot of heat, Newt, from a very small but vocal progressive Catholic circle for daring to ask that pro-life question of the president. They claim I should have corrected Trump when he supported the death penalty or echoed his support of the death penalty. But excuse me, the president, first of all, is not Catholic, and my job is not to share my position or anybody else's position with him, period. Barack Obama supported the death penalty. Biden, until just recently, after a lifetime of support, said he would like to see it end. But let's talk about abortion. You mentioned Joe Biden. He's a Catholic. He's committed to abortion on demand. How do you think that will impact the race and the Catholic support of his candidacy, or lack thereof?
Well, look, I think for people who care deeply about the right to life, they're going to very rapidly realize that they can't possibly be for Biden, or frankly for the Democratic Party, which in places like New York is now in effect legalizing infanticide. The governor of Virginia, a Democrat who said, well, we want to keep the baby comfortable for a day or two while we decide whether or not to kill it after it's born. I mean, this is infanticide. When I was young, it would have been unimaginable. You'd have thought that was in some weird, strange, barbaric country. But now it's the left wing of the Democratic Party. And so I think that people who are serious about right to life are virtually all going to end up voting for Trump.
Yeah. Very quickly, Newt, speaking of life issues, what do you make of Planned Parenthood urging American businesses this week to offer free birth control coverage to combat systemic racism?
Well, I think it's very ironic because Planned Parenthood was founded by a person who believed in eugenics and actually wanted to have Planned Parenthood eliminate inferior races. Go back and look at the 1920s and look at what she wrote and said. It's bizarre.
Yeah, and that Margaret Sanger statue is still standing in New York. That also is very bizarre to me. I also asked President Trump about the push for mail-in balloting for this November's election. He told me it was a recipe for massive voter fraud. Do you agree, or is this something that's necessary given the public safety concerns we're seeing?
Well, the places that have actually held elections have had no problems. You know, we've had special elections in Wisconsin and New York, just had elections yesterday in several states, and they're able to deal with it. The Democrats, and let me draw a distinction. We've always had absentee voting. The military has always voted, sent in a ballot, but they've been very carefully controlled. That in Pelosi's $3 trillion bill, they have a provision for a totally uncontrolled election where you can't ask for the identity of the person. You can't ask for proof that they are who they are. You can't ask where they live. They can do ballot harvesting, so somebody can go through the nursing home and pick up 80 or 90 ballots. I mean, this is an invitation to a corrupt, dishonest election.
Let's talk about your new book, Trump and the American Future. How would you describe the conflict we're seeing in America today? You list in the book a number of accomplishments the president has already achieved, and I want to get to that in a moment, but describe that conflict as it exists today in American life.
Yeah, this is the biggest choice since Abraham Lincoln in 1860. In 160 years, we've never had this big a difference. If you take the Pelosi, Schumer, Biden team, what they stand for, and then you take the Trump, McConnell, McCarthy team and what they stand for, you're talking about two totally different Americas. If Schumer and Pelosi and Biden win, within a year or two, they will turn the country into a cross between California and Seattle. We will no longer recognize it as what was historically called America. And you see this in Pelosi's $3 trillion bill, which is just filled with radicalism. So I think that I literally don't know of any election that is as huge a gap as we're about to see. And I'm frankly very worried about it. I mean, you have a president who said to carry a Chinese virus, a deliberately created depression as a public health measure, huge conflict in cities. I mean, Trump has got a lot on his shoulder as well, being attacked by 93% of the news media. So this is going to be quite a campaign. I think we can win it. In fact, I think we probably will win it, but it's going to be amazing.
You write that President Trump has been profoundly and consistently committed to fighting for religious liberty, Newt. You write he has argued that religious beliefs are as legitimate as sexual orientations. In all these steps, he angers the secular left, including many in newsrooms across the country. A key part of the re-election campaign in the second term will be adapting to and getting ahead of these attacks. Now, Newt Gingrich, why has religious liberty become a cornerstone issue for this president, despite the animosity it causes in some circles?
Well, I think there's a difference between religiosity, how often do you go to church, and what do you have in your heart? And I think he was very, very deeply moved by his visit to Warsaw and his understanding of John Paul II. And I think that that actually had a huge impact on him and his understanding that if you don't have religious freedom, in the long run, you don't have any freedom. And I think that was a sincere intellectual conversion about the way the world works.
Oh, Newt, you write about the U.S.-China relationship in your book, and this is how you put it. Our misdiagnosis of the Chinese Communist Party and its totalitarian system has now created serious challenges for the United States. These challenges threaten our national security, interests, and values. The Chinese Communist Party has outlined 10 major industries that it aims to dominate under its Made in China 2025 plan, including biopharmaceuticals and high-performance medical devices, next-generation information technology, aerospace and aviation equipment, maritime engineering equipment, and high-tech maritime vessel manufacturing. Newt, has the COVID pandemic slowed China's progress or ambitions at all?
Well, first of all, I think it's an example of political correctness that what should have been either a Chinese virus or a Wuhan virus became COVID-19 in order to make the Chinese feel better. But the truth is it's a Chinese virus. And the Chinese lied about it, and their behavior has cost hundreds of thousands of lives and trillions of dollars of wealth precisely because the Chinese communist dictatorship lied to the world. I don't think that has slowed them down. I think what slowed them down is people have come to understand how profoundly dishonest they were. And people then started looking at other places where they're dishonest. And you now see a growing sort of repulsion away from the Chinese in Australia, in Canada, in Great Britain, in India, where 20 Indian soldiers were killed a week ago.
I saw that.
There's just a general sense that this is a country that is reaching to control all of us, and that the rest of us have an interest in banding together to not let them get away with it.
Before I let you go, Newt, what do you see as the greatest challenge to American survival now?
Our education system. I think our education system is so bad, both in that from K through 12, there are millions of young children being cheated by unionized government schools that fail totally. And then beyond that, in college and graduate school, we have students who are being totally misinformed and told things that are just plain not true. It's the combination of the two that makes it so difficult.
Yeah, a lot of that we're seeing play out on the streets, certainly here in America, but really around the world, Newt, you're seeing this historical blindness. I mean, it's unbelievable. Newt Gingrich, thank you so much for being here.
Thank
Hope
you.
to see you soon. Trump and the American Future, Solving the Great Problems of Our Time by Newt Gingrich is available in bookstores everywhere and online. Thank you, Newt. Also this week, the president signed an executive order aimed at strengthening the U.S. child welfare system. The order, signed in the Oval Office on June 24th, seeks to improve the nation's foster care and adoption programs. It will direct the HHS to partner with state and local groups to improve federal oversight of child welfare programs and increase resources for caretakers and foster children. Stephen Mosher is coming up, but here's the conclusion of my exclusive interview with President Donald Trump. Watch.
After all we've seen, the tumult of the last few weeks, how do you bring this country together? And how do you get Black Americans to listen anew? They were leaning in and listening to what Donald Trump was saying and doing. How do you get them to give you a second look?
Well, it's a shame that I have to even ask that, because I did criminal justice reform, I did opportunity zones, I funded the black colleges, as you know,
First
and
president to do that.
universities.
Yep.
I funded it, and they have long-term financing. Nobody else did it. Obama didn't do it. Nobody did it. I did more for, I say it, and I say it openly, I did more for our black population than anybody other than Abraham Lincoln, okay? And nobody's even close. What I did on criminal justice reform, they've been trying to get it for years, and nobody did it. Obama didn't do it, I did it. And it's a shame you have to say that, because to be honest with you, Raymond, they should say, we love Trump. And I think a lot do. I think a lot of African American great people in this country, they appreciate what I've done. We'll soon find out.
What is your opinion, and how do you deal with these states that are refusing to open up, Mr. President? Is there anything you can do? Refuse them funding, withhold funding unless they open up?
A lot of it is a thing for November 3rd, because the longer they hold out, they think it hurts the economy, and if it hurts the economy, that's good for them. But our economy, we just had record job numbers 2 weeks ago. We had record retail sales numbers last week. I think we're going to do very well. We're doing very well.
Archbishop Vigano wrote you a letter that you tweeted out. He was the former nuncio, Vatican representative here in Washington. In it, he said, what you're facing is a battle of the children of the light versus the children of darkness. He said these protests were infernal deceptions. How did you react to that letter? He asked people to pray for you. And is that an accurate read of where we are?
I think it is, and I think he is a great gentleman, and it was a tremendous letter of support from the Catholic Church. He's highly respected, as you know. It was beautiful. It was really 3 pages long, and it was a beautiful letter, and I appreciated it. Yeah, but he's right in what he says.
Final question. How do you want to be remembered by the next generation, and how do you get there?
So I was there 3 months ago. We had the greatest economy ever, the greatest job numbers, great for everybody, for women, for African American, Hispanic American, Asian Americans, people without a high school diploma. There's so many categories, every single category. And then we got hit with the plague from China, and now I'm doing it again. And next year, we're going to have a phenomenal economic year, one of the best.
Joe Biden and the Democrats want to prosecute Americans for going to church, but not for burning a church. They believe you can riot, vandalize, and destroy, but you cannot attend a peaceful pro-America rally.
They're nipping at you over attendance at this Tulsa rally. What really happened there, in your opinion?
Well, there were many things. First of all, there was a curfew that was enforced the first night where many people had to leave.
Right.
And it was, enforced by the mayor. Where many people the first night, meaning a couple of nights out, they had to leave. They'd been waiting there, and then all of a sudden they're forced out. But there were many things that happened, including protesters, including Black Lives Matter, including probably Antifa. We'll find out because they're looking at it now. They had protesters. And also, for 2 weeks, we have been hammered that if you walk into that arena, you're going to be in big trouble. Big trouble. And, we had a good crowd. I'll tell you right now.
You did.
If you look at that, that was a lot of people. It was a 22,000 seat place. And if you have, we had a lot of people in there. And what they don't say is online was phenomenal numbers.
Right.
And I heard
and the
television,
broadcast network's huge.
I heard the television network did fantastic.
I don't know any politician or stand-up comedian who holds forth for 2 hours with the energy and verve that you brought, including the leather shoe routine, which was classic.
The leather shoes, that's right. I have them again. They're leather shoes, but they're not meant for an ice skating ramp.
No, don't do that.
No,
don't do
won't
that,
do
Mr. President.
Have a good time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our thanks to the President and the White House staff for making the interview possible. We've also extended an invitation to the Biden campaign. We look forward to talking with the Vice President in the days ahead. There is a breaking story coming out of China regarding payouts to the Vatican. We wanted to explore that story and the state of Christianity in mainland China. Here with an update and analysis is President of the Population Research Institute, author of The Bully of Asia, Stephen Mosher. Stephen, thanks for joining us. I want to start with that big report circulating. As I just mentioned, a fugitive Chinese billionaire, Miles Guo, alleges in a podcast that the Chinese Communist Party has granted $2 billion a year to the Vatican in an effort to gain influence over their internal policymaking and to buy the Holy See's silence on China's repression of religious freedom. What do you make of that allegation, first of all?
Well, I think Miles Guo is good on the big China picture, the general picture, and he may be off on some of the particulars. That's a huge sum of money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, my sources at the Vatican, I've been speaking to people about this yesterday afternoon and earlier today. They don't discount some payment, but they believe this amount is way over the top, that it's too large to have escape detection. But it would partially explain, wouldn't it, Stephen, the Vatican compliance on bishops. They're quiet in the face of heinous human rights and religious abuses. Just this week, 70-year-old Bishop Augustin Chutai, an underground bishop, was taken by Chinese officials to an undisclosed location. He's been loyal to the Vatican and has been under house arrest since 2007. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think that the Vatican's silence on the ongoing persecution of the Catholic Church in China and of religious believers in general, and of the massive violations of human rights in all aspects of society is just unconscionable. I mean, I don't know how you can watch protests for democracy and freedom in Hong Kong go on for 2 years and now be brutally repressed and not say something. I don't know how you can't mention the successful democracy and religious freedom on Taiwan. And I don't know how you cannot at least call out from time to time the brutal repression of the Catholic Church in China, which seems to be intensifying. Now, to go back to Miles Guo, he fled China several years ago.
Right.
He has a huge fortune of the tens of billions of dollars that he made in conjunction with senior leaders of the Chinese Communist Party. So he knows the Communist Party, this grand mafia, from the inside out. He's been in sweetheart deals, under the table bribes, back and forth with Chinese party officials for decades. So he knows how the party operates. He lives in New York City now, but he has good contacts in China. And most of what he says about the operations of the Chinese Communist Party is absolutely spot on. We know they have a massive influence operation going on around the world. They're trying to subvert democracies. They're trying to bribe dictators, and in that way win friends and influence people internationally and undermine the current international order of nation states. And they're spending billions and billions of dollars to do that. Now Miles Guo says they have a BGY program. And
right.
B
Tell
is
us about
control
that.
of the internet, and G is gold. We're going to buy influence. and why is Yellow using sex, prostitutes, and so forth to compromise elected officials and unelected officials. That makes perfect sense to me as a China expert. The Chinese Communist Party loves acronyms, right? The Gang of Four, the May 4th movement, the BGY movement. That fits right in. In terms of the amount of money to be spent, Miles says that they take a percentage of the export earnings from each country and then funnel it back into that country to buy influence, to undermine democratic institutions. That makes perfect sense to me as well, because the leaders, power in China is concentrated at the very top. People like Xi Jinping don't have a lot of time to get into nuances. So he'll say, okay, we'll take 1% of the export earnings from Australia and use it to undermine democracy there. Or now we'll take 5%. Miles says that it's increased from 1% to 5%. I think that's absolutely accurate, because we see huge amounts of money being spent all over the world, in Italy, for example, and in Australia and in the United States. We know from the Department of Education study now that billions and billions of dollars have gone into Harvard and Yale and Stanford and other places, which gives the Chinese Communist Party access to intellectual property and enables the theft of intellectual property to continue. So that's all accurate. Now, I think the number with regard to the Vatican is way overblown, and I can tell you why.
Why?
In Chinese, Raymond, you used 10,000 a lot, okay? We use 1,000 to describe large sums. We say 10,000 or 100,000. They say 10,000. 1 10,000, 10 10,000. A million is 100,000. It's very easy to get a decimal point off when you're doing that. I have to stop and think. I've been doing this for 40 years. I speak, Chinese fluently, but I have to stop and think when I'm translating numbers. And I think he got his decimal point off. And I'll tell you why. He says that trade between the United States and China is $7+ trillion a year. It's not. It's $700 billion a year. Most of that goods coming from China to the United States. Very little of it going from the United States back to China. So he's off by a factor of 10. So when he says that China is spending $35 billion to influence events in the United States, it's probably 3.5 billion. When he says China is spending $2 billion with regard to the Vatican in donations, contributions, whatever you want to call them, it's probably 200 million. Yeah, I think the number 2 billion is way overblown, but I think 200 million, who knows? Are there Vatican officials who would like to have generous contributions to their work? Probably so.
Yeah. Well, there was that letter that the Vatican sent out. It was a public statement thanking the People's Republic of China for their donations and help during the COVID crisis, which was a curious public statement, Stephen Mosher, because Taiwan had also donated hundreds of thousands of masks and other things to the cause. They got no public thank you.
Yeah, Taiwan has gone down the memory hole. For some reason, no one in the Vatican seems to remember that the Vatican still has diplomatic relations with the Republic of China on Taiwan, where 22 million free Chinese have free elections, a free press. They're able to demonstrate, they peacefully assemble, freedom of the press, freedom of association, freedom of religion. Almost 1 million Catholics there, never mentioned by the Vatican. They seem to have disappeared off the face of the earth. Hong Kong as well. Lots of Catholics led by Cardinal John Tong and, of course, the retired Cardinal Emeritus, the great Cardinal Joseph Zen, whom we both know. It's all China, China, China. And what we hear about China is, I don't know, very, 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 very positive things are said about China by Archbishop Marcelo Sanchez Serrando, for example, about the wonderful social progress made by the Chinese Communist Party. So it's all sweetness and light with regard to China. It's all darkness and obscurity with regard to Hong Kong and Taiwan. What accounts for that? It could be just that Pope Francis hopes that one day he will be able to go to China and speak directly to the Chinese people, which I would like to see as well. I don't think it's going to happen, but I would certainly like to see it. But are there cardinals in the Vatican? Are there bishops, archbishops in the Vatican who would be happy to receive a large check, 6 or 7 figures from the Chinese Communist Party? I have to think that that probably happens, as the letter you just mentioned refers to.
Yeah. Well, 1 minute here I have left, Stephen. Archbishop Claudio Celi, who helped broker that Vatican-China agreement, he said a couple of weeks ago that he believes the agreement should be renewed 1 to 2 years. Now, given the state of Christianity in China since this thing was signed in 2018, should this deal be renewed? What does the Vatican get out of this?
Well, I don't think that the Vatican gets anything out of it. I certainly think that the last year and a half has not seen the 40 candidates that the Vatican has picked to become bishops, any of them accepted by the Chinese Communist
None
Party.
of them.
None of them. I think we have dozens of Catholic dioceses in China that still do not have bishops. I think that's another unfulfilled hope. I think the trip to China that was perhaps envisioned by the Pope certainly hasn't materialized, and I understand no plans are in progress for that. So he also said, Archbishop Celi did, that some of the things happening in China were troubling. Well, I wouldn't say troubling. I would say disastrous. And the best thing to do would be to terminate the deal when it expires this September.
Stephen Mosher, author of the book Bully of Asia, Why China's Dream is the New Threat to World Order. Stephen, you were way ahead of the curve on this one. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Raymond.
He's a top-rated kicker in the NFL and a member of the New Orleans Saints since 2009. His second-half onside kick was instrumental in the Saints' Super Bowl victory in 2010 over the Indianapolis Colts. There's much more to him than just football, however. As a youth, he was often bullied and suffered a lack of confidence in school. With the support of his faith and his family, he used those obstacles to achieve incredible success in sports and in the classroom. He's written a new book, The Middle School Rules of Thomas Morstead. Please welcome to the program, Thomas Morstead. Thomas, thanks for being here. What made you decide to write a children's book? I know you have children of your own.
Well, the author, Sean Jensen, reached out to me. He's done a number of books in this series, and you know, he just thought I'd be a great addition to the series, and I was blown away that he asked me. It's been a great project to work on for the past year. Sean's been a joy to work with, and it's been a very rewarding project through writing the book.
I love the format of the book, Thomas, because reluctant readers love, what now they're called graphic novels now. They were kind of called comic books when we were kids, but it's got an easy feel to it, particularly for boys. Now, you endured bullying as a child because of the way you looked. You had a lazy eye and the way you dressed. What did those experiences teach you?
Well, I think it teaches you empathy. Learn in life is to be uncomfortable or to feel pain or to suffer. And I think it just teaches you empathy, and it teaches you, hopefully how you don't want to feel and how to treat other people. And so, I'm glad that I went through those experiences as a young person.
In the book, you talk about your parents, and especially your grandfather, a farmer, who taught you the value of hard work. Why was it so important to learn that at a young age, and what of it do you carry into your career now?
All of it. I think more important than what you say as a parent or a grandparent or a mentor to someone is how you act and the way you model. And I've been very fortunate to have a lot of people like that in my life that, I just watched the way they operated. I watched the way they treated other people. I watched the way my dad spoke to my mom, how he treated her, how he spoke to us, and how he treated us. And, I think not everybody's fortunate to have that. And I think it's a huge reason for kind of where I'm at today.
I was surprised to learn the roots of this kicking career. It really started with rugby, according to the book. Explain that to me.
Yeah, look, my mom is from England, childhood, and so we would go visit at Christmases or weddings in the summer, and I just got to be around it. And my Uncle Charlie kind of taught me how to punt a spiral with a rugby ball. And I don't know, some people love going and hitting golf balls at the driving range, and I loved going out and playing footballs. So it kind of got me going at an early age.
Your faith has always been an important part of your life, and it's woven gently throughout this book. Why was that important? It's rare to find a middle school book or a children's book that incorporates faith into it. Was that something important to you as you wrote this?
Yeah, I think it is very important. And, I'm not trying to get anybody over the head with it, but I've had a lot of people in my life that have had a type of confidence who they were and what they stood for, that it didn't feel human. Everybody deals with different things, and those certain people that impacted me, they all had one thing in common, and that was their faith. And I wanted to have that sort of confidence in my life and what direction I was going. And look, I certainly haven't made all the right decisions. I've made plenty of mistakes, but I think it's something that's always been something I've been able to go back to and kind of recenter on. And so I just think it's important that people know that.
Well, those happy voices in the background attest to the good choices you did make. Now, you and your wife, Lauren, started a foundation, What You Give Will Grow, committed to improving the lives of those in need, particularly children with cancer. Now, the foundation was inspired by a former coach, Coach Gans. Tell me about him and his influence in your life.
I could spend hours talking about him. I had him at a very, I was still very formidable at that time. I was 22 years old. He came into SMU my senior year. He had coached in the NFL for 25 years as a special teams coordinator, and it was just a blessing to have him. He was a godsend. He used to always say we had 1 year together, and he died the day after I got drafted, so that was quite a trip. And he taught me how to live my life, and he again was a wonderful model how to treat people. He treated everybody so wonderfully around him. He knew everyone in the building, just had respect for every human being that he came in contact with. And I think just being able to him operate for a whole year, and he was just a huge mentor for me at that time in my life. And so I knew that I always wanted to do something to, honor him, and so this was kind of the way to do that. And so it's been special to be able to do it.
I love the line you attribute to him at the near the end of the book. You have an afterword, and you say that he taught you the more aggressive team usually wins the game, and that kind of gave you peace in the middle of a high-stakes Super Bowl. I want to talk a little about the NFL now. You all have not been back to practice, to your training facility, I guess due to the COVID pandemic. When do you expect you'll go back, and under what circumstances, Thomas?
I don't have an expectation right now. I do know that training camp is slated to begin the last week of July. The world is changing every day, every week, every month. So who knows what it's going to be like in another month and a half or month. It's just, the world just keeps changing. And so I think, as a sport, we're fortunate that we're not missing games right now. So we have the being able to continue to gather information and continue to, wait for new things to come out, new testing, more testing. And so hopefully, I know that everybody got skin in the game. Everybody wants the season to happen. And so hopefully everybody's working together. The smartest people in the world are all pointing their gun at this same thing right now. So I'm very hopeful in the fact that, that we're making strides, whether it's more testing or different types of testing that could be quicker or more accurate, or, there could be, at a time there could be a vaccine, things like that. So I'm very hopeful for those things to continue to develop.
Do you anticipate half full Superdomes or no fans at all during these games? What do you think is going to happen? What are you hearing?
I don't know. I don't know. I would say I'm putting my expectation at no fans in the stadiums because that's kind of the worst case scenario if we're playing, is that there would be no one out there to watch. But I'm hopeful that we'll have fans. I don't know how filled the stadiums will be and how that'll operate, but like I said, the world will be so different in another month or two. So we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah. A couple of weeks ago, the Saints held a virtual meeting following an apology by Drew Brees for comments he made regarding those NFL protests back in 2015 and regarding the national anthem. How important was that meeting, and what did you all learn from one another?
Well, I thought it was very important. It was a very vulnerable meeting, but I think it was a very necessary meeting. And I think maybe some people that felt a certain way hadn't maybe fully expressed themselves clearly enough. And I think that definitely happened with a number of players having that opportunity to share what they felt and to speak on their own experiences. And so I think it was a good thing. And, hopefully moving forward, I'm excited to see kind of how our team and so many other teams across the league, how we move forward, and really looking forward to being part of some positive change, not only in New Orleans but in the country. So it's exciting.
Thomas, final question. What do you want kids to take away from the book? Why did you want to be a part of this and particularly write it for children?
I think, look, there's a lot of answers that I could give for that, but I think my story is kind of unique in that I wasn't a highly touted recruit. I was a late bloomer, and I didn't have this illustrious high school career or things like that. I think it was more about, sticking to your convictions, knowing, even though I wasn't outwardly confident, I was inwardly confident in kind of who I was and what I was about. And I just hope that kids that get a chance to read it, if they're going through a similar type of situation, sometimes you can feel like no one's ever been through it before, and that they'll know that, hey, I've persevered through this, and that you need to have it's hard to have a long forward looking lens when you're that young. You just lack a lot of perspective, and hopefully kids can see that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and that doing the right thing and sticking to your convictions about what you think is the right thing to do is going to pay off down the road. And it's just a hard thing to do at that age. So hopefully it will inspire those kids to do.
No, they're great lessons throughout. And as you were speaking, I was thinking of that lesson about, you can do more than you think you can. And, your academic studies, not only your sports pursuits, but also the pursuits of the mind, and to do that in tandem, and it shapes a full person. So I love the book, and I think young people will as well. Thomas Morstead, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me on.
The Middle School Rules of Thomas Morstead is available at bookstores everywhere and online. You can also find out more about his What You Give Will Grow Foundation at wygwg.org. School's out, summer's almost here. All 3 installments of the Will Wilder saga are also available in paperback, hardback, and audio. Visit willwilderbooks.com for your preview, and you can order it there as well. And don't forget, The World Over is a podcast. We're available on Apple's iTunes podcast store. Search World Over. On Spotify, we're EWTN World Over. So go get those podcasts. That's all the time we have for now. Be sure to catch us next week. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. See you next time. Bye now.